Greetings, everybody. Welcome to the Wednesday, September 16th, 2015 episode of Free Webinar Wednesdays. This is Eric Cook, and I'm with WSI, Internet Consulting, where we work with businesses and organizations on helping them better understand and leverage the power of the Internet as a strategic business tool. You can learn more about me and WSI online at www.poweredbywsi.com. With me this week is my good friend and Free Webinar Wednesday partner and just all-around great guy, Mr. Jeff Simpkins. Jeff, say hello to everybody out there in Free Webinar Wednesday world.
Hello, everyone. This is Jeff Simpkins. I'm with Community Bank Consulting, Inc., and you can learn more about me and my company online at www.communitybankconsulting.com.
Excellent. Did you like that little great guy edition? I don't normally say that, but I always think that you are, even though I don't say it.
I'm a great guy this week, huh?
You are a great guy. Last week, I don't know, a little up for debate. But this week, I think you're a great guy.
It's been a big week for me. You know, corporate taxes are due September 15th, and I actually got Community Bank Consulting's corporate tax return mailed on Monday the 14th. Take note.
Yeah. Well, congratulations. We'll virtual high fives all around the room. So way to go. We were talking before we launched, and of course, if you're joining us live, you may be wondering why Napoleon Grills is showing on the screen, and we'll get to that. But you had mentioned you're going to be heading off to an event with a bunch of bankers, and for any bankers that may be joining us or listening to the recording afterwards, would you like to disclose where you're going to be, and maybe you'll get an opportunity to run into some Free Webinar Wednesday banker folks?
I would. I will be at the CSI, Computer Systems Inc. Customer Conference in lovely Nashville, Tennessee, and that is coming up the week of September 28th. The event, actually, there's a pre-event on the 29th and 30th, and the conference is October 1st and 2nd. So I'd love to meet anyone from our Free Webinar Wednesdays group that will be in Nashville.
Excellent. Oh, very cool. I know we've actually been to a couple of Free Webinar Wednesday, or I got Free Webinar Wednesdays on the brain here. We've been to a couple CSI events in the past and have been at them together. And I think both of us have presented there. Are you going to be attending, or are you attending and presenting, or what's your role going to be while you're at the event?
I am actually presenting. I'm doing two sessions. One of the services that we offer to banks is an operations review, where we go in and help them look at the way not only they're using their technology systems, but also all of their procedures and things that support those systems and the processes that they're doing with them. And I am actually doing sessions on doing a self-assessment for banks in the operations review areas. So I'm looking forward to it. I've got 2 one-hour sessions and lots of information to cover and not a whole lot of time.
Yeah, that's always the case. Absolutely. That seems to always be the case. So, very cool. Very cool. I'm noticing the comments in the chat box, and yes, we haven't even gotten to the point where we've suggested people contact us with the chat box, but kudos to you, Jennifer, for bringing that up. And yes, we definitely will mention that. Sorry that you had to stumble upon it, but we'll definitely make sure to mention that. I'll leave that as a teaser, but we'll definitely talk about that bank event that I'm going to be at. Actually, when Jeff, you had asked if I was going to be attending the CSI conference, I'm actually on my way down to Sanibel Island, Florida. There's a firm in Texas called Bank Advisory Group that does a CEO summit, and it's a rather interesting layout. I've never heard of this before, but I was approached at a recommendation from a colleague, and the structure around this is there are CEOs from around the country, banks that actually belong to this Bank Advisory Group. And I understand there's a waiting list to get in, but they get access to 2 events per year, one in the spring, one in the fall, and the one in the fall is coming up down in Florida. And the groups of banks will get organized and categorized based on similar size. So they're in rooms of banks, billion-dollar banks versus $200 million banks. And they come down and participate in 2 days worth of intense, hands-on, facilitated discussion. One of the topics that bankers have said they really want to learn more about is in the area of cybersecurity, and I don't think that anybody would argue that in today's day and age, cybersecurity is a pretty hot topic given credit card fraud and identity theft and all the other things that are trying to get access to our information. But the other element that the CEO said they wanted to learn more about was in the area of digital marketing. And so I was tapped for that. And so I'm going to be down there for actually 2 weeks working from Florida, but it's afternoon sessions, and just really looking forward to it because it's different than anything that I've ever done in the sense that I'm facilitating a discussion, and it's going to be much more thinking on my feet and coming up with ideas and hopping online and answering questions. So it's probably going to challenge me a little bit intellectually speaking, but it's going to be a fun event. So unfortunately, I won't be at CSI, but I'll be hobnobbing and schmoozing with bank CEOs from across the country, and we'll both have a chance to get our banking on next week, or I guess that week. So looking forward to it. So let's cover some housekeeping items. I know Jennifer's already figured out the fact that you can type information into the chat box and make a suggestion, and so kudos to you, Jen. But for the rest of you, we do like to have free webinar Wednesdays as interactive sessions, and we didn't put a pre-show post out. I think that's 2 weeks in a row we've missed. We haven't had time to actually post what the show is going to be about, but we want to make sure we continue to have the shows because I know a lot of you have got this bookmarked on your calendar and figured it's more important that Jeff and I show up and share some information with you than it is for us to put all that stuff out. So type in your question. Today is going to be basically a recap. Some of the things from our 20th anniversary global convention with WSI and as it relates to the digital world. So it's certainly not going to be a WSI commercial, but all the cool stuff that we were exposed to and got to learn while we spent a few days down in Miami at our global conference. And last week we had Voltage join us as a precursor to that. But I've got some information. We had folks like from Google and Facebook and LinkedIn and a bunch of authors and public speakers that were there. So there's a lot of really cool stuff that we can share. So if you want to dive into something in more focused or particular, certainly use the chat function that is there on the right-hand side of your screen and let us know. And then, of course, this session and all sessions are recorded. And as soon as I have some time in my schedule, I say that wink, wink, nudge, nudge, I'll get that up onto our YouTube channel and embed it out to Free Webinar Wednesday so you can listen to it. So I think what I'll do is I will answer Jennifer's comment first. Those of you that are joining from the banking industry may have heard about it. I know John Siracusa, who's the founder of MOSA Marketing out in New Jersey, has been doing a tremendous amount of promotion and advertising around this. But I have been asked to be at the first of what I hope will be many bank social media conferences, and he's having this out in New Jersey in 2016. And you can learn more at banksocialmediaconference.com, and it's going to be under the hashtag BankSocial. You can go check out John Siracusa and MOSA. There's a pretty cool little video here that you can check out. You can follow them on Twitter and get some ideas. But this is a conference that John has created, and I actually had the opportunity. He's got a podcast called Bank on It, which is pretty cool. And much like us, John spends a lot of time talking to bankers and credit union folks around the country, talking about the importance of branding and content. And this conference is one that he's created that really focuses on how to, I guess, get financial institutions to think about content and what it really matters for the customer and how to be relevant. And you can see that I think with the exception of myself, he doesn't really have any bankers or former bankers on the agenda. It's all folks from the outside. They really focus on marketing, content, awareness, innovation. So you can go to the conference and kind of see, and I'll have to be honest, as I scroll through the list of all the speakers and the folks that are there, I'm somewhat humbled by the level of knowledge that these folks are actually bringing to the table. So I'm certainly honored to be included. But this is going to be a great event. They've designed it to be close by. You can fly into the airport there in New Jersey. It's at the and there's John. You can see him and I go to the same barber. But it's at a conference that's very close by to the airport, so it should be an easy in, easy out. And yeah, so I know a few of these people have co-presented with a couple of them. Like Joe Sullivan was on a webinar of mine just last month, actually talking about branch strategy for banking. But it's really designed for the financial services space, all focused on content. So I'm really excited. So let's see if we can just confirm. Yep. So it's April 7th through the 8th out in Newark, New Jersey. So yes, thank you, Jennifer, for the nudge to mention that. So if you're looking for some innovative ideas and you happen to be in the banking or financial services space, definitely check it out. So very, very cool. So with that, Mr. Simpkins, shall we proceed into part of the content? Yeah. Well, I guess the first element that or item that I wanted to mention, only because you've actually had an opportunity to, I think, work in person, but collaborate with him on a couple of occasions, and this is the first time he's actually attended our event, and we've talked about his book on a number of occasions. So Michael Port, who much less hair than what appears on the book itself, but Michael Port of the Book Yourself Solid fame actually was at our conference this year, and he did two sessions. The first one was really focused. It was kind of an all-access, general stage session on heroic public speaking, and so this is an effort that he has right now. If you don't know Michael Port, he's an actor. He's been in several television shows and movies. Amy Mead, who is the co-founder, and as I understand it, also his fiancée now. But the two of them are professionally trained graduates of acting programs, and they've come up with this effort called heroic public speaking. And they actually took two consultants from the audience, and they brought them on stage and facilitated a rather humorous but very, I guess, helpful way of giving people some insight on speaking in front of an audience. And, Jeff, you and I don't want to say spend a tremendous amount of time, probably maybe me a little bit more than you, but certainly when you're presenting at a conference like CSI, you're in front of a group of people, you're presenting information. But you could just as easily as a consultant or a business advisor be talking at a chamber meeting or at a service club. And so what he proposes is everybody to a certain extent is a public speaker. It's just the degree to which the public, the size of the public that you're speaking with. So he mentioned his new book called Steal the Show, and of course he's got a couple of other activities that you can also participate in. But it was pretty cool when he went through and kind of gave his list of things. I just wanted to run through some of the things that he suggests that speakers avoid. And I know when I was seeing him go through this list, and Jeff, I don't know if any of these you're guilty of as well, but these are things that he suggested to avoid. And I just wanted to walk through them and then give some reasons behind it. So the first thing, when you take the stage, avoid saying, "Hey, I'm really happy to be here." And I don't know about you, Jeff, but I'll do that. I'm happy that you guys invited me, because he says the contrary to that is, well, what's the alternative? If you're not happy to be here, would you rather be someplace else? When you go through and maybe do your introduction and then say, okay, well, now let's get started, that can also give a little bit of a negative connotation that all the other stuff that you talked about before you said let's get started really wasn't worthwhile, and maybe the perception that you're wasting their time. One thing that he also suggested was, somebody asks you a question, try to avoid saying, well, that's a great question, because the downside or the risk is if the next person asks a question and you don't say, well, that's a great question, you can be setting the wrong idea to the folks that are actually interacting with you. I think I've actually done that on Free Webinar Wednesdays a couple of times, and we've said, hey, we've got a really great question, and then the next one is equally as great, but we don't say, here's another great question. And so if you've ever been the victim of that, our apologies, because that certainly wasn't the intent. He also shared some other, I guess, observations about if you're on a stage, when's the right time to walk around and when's the right time to stand in one spot. And I don't know about you, Jeff. Are you somebody, and it's been a while since I've actually seen you present, are you someone that likes to be behind a lectern or a podium and be a little bit stationary, or are you someone that likes to roam around and kind of travel the audience?
I'm a travel the audience kind of guy. I like to include the audience in my space.
And I am the same way as well, although he gave some really interesting examples. While it's not intentional, and it's one that I'm going to have a lot more, I guess, conscious awareness on, I do know even one of the last sessions that I did, because particularly if you're in a room that's very wide and it's difficult, you know, if you're in a long room, it's a whole lot easier because you've got visual connection with everybody. But if it's a long room and you're traveling, just be really cognizant of the fact that you can turn your back on somebody, and not that you want to walk in a, you know, football sideways shuffle, but making sure that your back's not turned. And then when you get to a point that you really want to emphasize, make sure that you're not traveling while you're actually trying to make that point, because he suggested, and I agree, gives the audience a little too much to think about because they're focused on you walking. So a walk is a really good opportunity when you're doing some transition and building up to the next point. But then when you want to really reinforce a key item or a hot topic, you stand in one spot and present it at that point. And so I thought that was a really good one. Let me ask you this, Jeff. What do you typically do with your hands when you're talking? Are you a pocket guy? Do you do the old soccer pose and have them clasped in front of you like somebody's shooting a penalty kick at you? What do you do with your hands?
I think I generally am doing the old talking with my hands thing, and I also tend to have notes when I'm doing a presentation, so I will have notes in my hand very frequently.
Okay. And I'm similar, although I typically don't have notes, which doesn't surprise me because you're way more organized and focused than I am. I'm a little bit more of the attention deficit disorder squirrel chaser. So that can tend to get me in trouble every once in a while, chasing a tangent or having a thought that rambles on. But it was surprising when people were called on stage. If you're not used to it, you will put your hands over your stomach maybe, or you'll put them, you know, I mentioned the soccer pose where you've got them clasped in front of you. And what I learned actually at another speaking training that I did a few weeks ago when I was out in Seattle is that is a sign of insecurity, because while you may not realize it, what the coach that I listened to in Seattle suggested is if you're feeling vulnerable because the abdominal area of your body tends to be the fleshiest part and the most exposed to a predator, this is going back to kind of lizard brain type stuff here, but you tend to put your hands in front of you to protect yourself because you're feeling threatened. And what you're unconsciously doing is sending a signal to the audience that you're guarded or that you are somehow uncomfortable. And if you're not one that likes to talk with your hands and reinforce ideas and concepts, having your hands just at your side, while it may not necessarily be the most comfortable thing, is the best way to convey yourself to an audience. And I didn't realize that, especially the whole soft, fleshy part that, you know, I didn't think of a saber-toothed tiger chasing me down as to the reason why I tend to put my hands in front of me sometimes. But I thought that was kind of interesting that there's some prehistoric, I guess, tendencies that are still alive and well in our bodies and our psyche. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And then the last thing that he mentioned, and I think I've done this a couple of times. It's hard to do it on a webinar because you can't see hands. But when you point at an audience, it can be a little confrontational. But what he suggested is using an open hand during that process. So it's much more inviting. So if I wanted to ask you a question or have you answer a question or whatever, I want to acknowledge you. Instead of pointing at you, almost make the handgun, with the thumb kind of up in the air. I would go ahead and open my palm to you and say, Jeff, do you have something to share? Or yes, Jeff, what would you like to contribute? The body language that signifies is much more open and inviting as opposed to the confrontational gun. And, some cultures even see, the finger, and I'm talking about the index finger here for us here in the United States, but some cultures can even be offended by pointing a finger at them. And you certainly don't want to run the risk of offending anybody in your audience. So those were just some pretty cool little takeaways that I got out of Michael, and he certainly knew his way around the stage. You could tell that he was a professionally trained individual and had a lot of experience on the stage. But if you're listening and you're up for your 5-minute spiel at your next D&I meeting, or you've got to do a presentation at Rotary, or you're going to be at a chamber event, maybe some of those will come into play and help you out. So, any thoughts on those?
Yeah, Michael is a really good presenter and a really good speaker. The tips that you shared are great. I can certainly see the validity of those.
Yep. And being able to meet him, you and I have talked. We've done probably 2 or 3 free webinar Wednesday sessions over the 6+ years that we've been doing this webinar. But I think we've shared before that the free webinar Wednesdays concept is really based off of one of his chapters of always have something that you can invite somebody to. And it was pretty cool because I was able to actually tell him the story about free webinar Wednesdays. I do know that there are several free webinar Wednesday followers. Daniel, I'm talking to you and others that I got an opportunity to see face-to-face at the conference. A lot of my WSI colleagues will hop on here and join live. And even though you didn't get the accolades, Jeff, they are very complimentary to the webinars and the information that you and I have been able to share over the years. But it was just cool that the guy that wrote the book that inspired you and I to bang out the concept of free webinar Wednesdays at my house in an afternoon, what seemed like it was going to be just a short-term thing, has been able to survive this long. And we've met some interesting people and shared some great ideas. And it was just cool to shake his hand and give him a thanks for putting that in his book and inspiring us to do this. So that was pretty cool. So,
I feel like we should sing the Carol Burnett song now.
I'm tugging on my ear. Can you see me?
I'm so glad we had this time together.
Yep. Oh, that's too funny. So I don't know. Hopefully not everybody, and I'm stretching a little bit there because I'm not as old as you are, but I do remember that watching the show with the parents. So I got a bunch of tabs up here, and I guess I just want to walk through some of the other ones, and let me just go back because I got off on a little bit of a tangent. Let me go back to the Napoleon Grill and kind of explain why I got that up there, because I know, Jeff, that was one of your questions, like, what do we got a grill site up there for? One of the things that we really enjoy doing as part of an organization when WSI gets together, again, we've got consultants all over the world, and so we get together and share our successes, and this was one of the sites that actually took home some pretty significant award, and we submitted this to the Web Marketing Association as WSI, and the reason that I think this is so cool is the consultant team and the designer / developer that actually took home the award are all strategic partners of mine that we do work with on pretty much a daily basis. So not only are Doug and Chris really good friends, but we do stuff in the same methodology and the same process within our own WSI business that these guys are doing. And they took home a Best in Industry award for Best Manufacturing Website. They took the gold standard for this, which I talked to Chris afterwards, and I'm not so sure he felt that corporate really understood the level of significance that this was. We typically will get a lot of, you know, industry recognitions, and I think we've got over 50 awards in the years that we've been submitting them. But very rarely do we get the actual gold standard award, and so this was pretty cool. So I just wanted to publicly give Chris and Doug and our team some public kudos, because I thought that it was pretty cool. And they're a Canadian-based company that does grills and outdoor kitchens and all sorts of other stuff, and it's got some pretty impressive technology behind it. It's very beautifully done, lots of use of imagery. You know, even if you're not big into grilling, I know we're kind of getting to the tail end of summer here, at least in Michigan. Although, darn it, I'm still going to get out and do a little bit more grilling before the snow flies. It's just got a lot of really cool stuff that it did. It's all mobile responsive, and definitely is worth a look-see, just as evidence of the capabilities that we've been able to amass within the WSI marketplace. So we're pretty excited about that. So anyway, good job to Chris, good job to Doug, and everybody that's involved. So I mentioned that there were a few authors that joined us, and we had folks from the big social media. You know, we had Google, we had Facebook, we had LinkedIn. They were all represented in speakers from each of those. But we had some really cool speakers that actually participated as well. So Dave Kerpen, who's the CEO over at Likeable Media, did a session, and actually I want to get this right. I think he's the number one, I guess, engagement guy, or he's the number one followed, or he took like some number one LinkedIn category as being the most well-connected. But he talked about, you know, the whole concept of being likable, and in social media, that's so very important to just make sure that when you're out there, what is it that constitutes being likable in social media? Whether you're looking to build a personal brand, or you're looking to build a business brand, or what I think everybody would agree is, you know, you maybe can't separate those these days, because if somebody is interested in doing business with you, they're going to want to know who you are and what you're like as an individual. Because if you are working with somebody that, yes, LinkedIn influencer, that's the word. Thank you, Daniel. Number one LinkedIn influencer. So, but if somebody wants to do business with your business, they're going to also want to know who within that organization is going to be responsible for managing that reputation. And this kind of goes back, when I started in banking, my father told me people are going to bank with their banker, not just with their bank, because they want to make sure you're there to take care of them. And he shared 7 strategies, and I think there's more than this, but he picked out 7 strategies of being likable in social media. And I just want to rattle those off and maybe see if you've got some observations or thoughts on any of those. But the first one that he talked about was the importance of listening attention to what people are saying, not distributing content or posting. Pretty cool. When he was in Las Vegas, he was waiting to check in.
Eric, you need to repeat what you just said. We lost your audio for a minute.
Where did you lose me?
At the beginning of the segment that you were just doing for about 30 seconds.
Oh. Did you get the part about him being the influencer in LinkedIn? Number one influencer in LinkedIn. Did you get that?
Yep. Start right after that.
Okay. So I was just talking about the 7 elements that he talked about as being contributing factors to being likable in social media. And the first one was listening. So I'm going to go ahead and go through that here. You can still hear me, I assume?
We can.
Good. I seem to always have audio gremlins. I don't know what the deal is. But anyway, so the first item that he talked about was the importance of listening and paying attention to what other people are saying so that you know what you want to talk about. And most people don't listen nearly enough. In fact, he even joked about some people are only listening because they're waiting for an opportunity to inject something to say. They're not really paying attention. But he shared a story of how he was in Vegas, a casino experience and a listening opportunity. So he was actually checking in at the Aria, which is one of the newer casinos there in Las Vegas, and he was standing in line waiting and waiting and waiting. Ended up being 45 minutes he was standing in line, and he finally couldn't resist the urge anymore. It went to Twitter and said something to the effect of, 45 minutes in line and still waiting, hashtag Aria, hashtag fail. And if you're familiar with social media, if somebody does hashtag fail, you pretty much know that you're not doing something that you should be doing. And what everybody in the audience, including myself, expected was that Aria would come back and go, oh my gosh, we're so sorry, what can we do to help here? And they would address it very, very quickly. But that didn't happen. But what did happen was the Rio, which is a little bit older, it's not right on the strip, it's a little bit off, they came back. But instead of saying, hey, come over here, we've only got a 5-minute wait, or whatever the case may be, because that may say, well, why don't you have a wait at your hotel versus Aria? Maybe nobody's got a wait over there because your hotel's old and dumpy. What they did is they came back and they they @messaged him, or they tweeted and said, sorry that you're having a bad experience. Hope the rest of your stay in Las Vegas is a good one. And while it didn't get him to walk out of the line and go over to the Rio to register there, you can bet, and what he said is the next time he returned to Las Vegas, where do you think he stayed? At the Rio. And he admitted it's not as nice and as fresh and as new, but they were listening, they were paying attention. And he said that only a few months later, somebody within his family actually contacted him because he went out and he liked them on Facebook and started engaging with the Rio. Somebody in his family saw that he liked the Rio and contacted him and said, hey, we're thinking about going to Las Vegas. We've got a big event. We're going to bring in a bunch of people for a big birthday party. I see that you like the Rio. Would you recommend staying there? And he said yes. So what happened as a result of the Rio paying attention to people in Las Vegas discussing their challenges and frustrations and not necessarily trying to swoop in and be a vulture, but to offer genuine, sincere, hey, we hope that the rest of your time in Las Vegas is good, blah, blah, blah. They left the door open, and he certainly walked through it, which resulted in not only business from him, but a 20-person party that came back and stayed there as well. So making sure that you're listening certainly is very important. This is further reinforced. The next item that was on his list was responsiveness. And we talked a little bit about this when we had our discussion on reputation and online reviews, making sure that you respond to every single person, not because you want to just get the last word, but you want to make sure that people know that you're paying attention. And depending on the audience, have a little fun with it as well. But he said 60% of brands typically don't respond to customers on social media. And he likened that. I mean, imagine if you were in the middle of a football field with a bunch of customers and somebody asked you a question and you just walked away, and everybody in the football field saw that you just completely ignored them. Or if somebody calls you on the phone and you just pick up the phone and then just hang it up. So it was a pretty powerful thing. And don't be afraid to say thank you and I'm sorry. He joked about even the fact that his attorneys don't necessarily like him apologizing because then it's an admission of guilt if something's not right. But being genuineness and responsive certainly all contributes to being likable through social media. The next item that was on his list was the power of storytelling. And storytelling certainly is much, much more powerful in today's social media driven world than it was, a few years ago. And I think, I've obviously remembered his story from the Las Vegas example and the Aria and the Rio, because I've stayed at the Rio and I can totally relate. And I know that it's not the shiniest, fanciest hotel in Las Vegas, but obviously they get it and they're paying attention. Authenticity was another thing that's important, being online and offline authentic so that you're the same person in both areas, and resist the urge of, I saw the cartoon at least a couple of times, the New Yorker on back in the early days of the internet. It had the two dogs sitting at the computer, and I think the tagline was, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. And, that is no longer possible. You have to make sure that everybody understands who you are. The fifth item that he talked about was having better advertising. So if you're going to go out and go after your customers and advertise to them, you have to be really, really good at it, because people don't like to be sold to if they're not ready to be sold to. And figure out if you can leverage peer recommendations, because more and more people trust that. Going back to, again, his recommendation of liking the reel on Facebook led to somebody in his family contacting him and saying, hey, is this someplace that you recommend staying? I see that you like it. Have you had experience with it? But you can now go and actually reach, down to an individual person level. And he actually did something kind of funny, and I know my wife's not listening today, so I can tell this, but he went out and he bought a Facebook ad. And in Facebook, you can get very granular and very targeted. And so he put in so many different parameters to his Facebook ad that the only person that it would fit, based on education, where they lived, what they like, where they worked, all that other stuff, the only person that could see that Facebook ad was his wife. And while he was away on a conference, he went out and he bought a Facebook ad for his wife and said, miss you, look forward to seeing you. And so, while you may not necessarily want to do that as a business to narrow it down to one individual person, certainly the capability is there to get much more granular and relevant to your audience so that you stand out. The last two items he talked about were making sure that you're providing something of value. And he gave us a ton of freebies to take away, lots of really good ideas, and it's good. There was a lot of talk at the conference about things like, should you have ebooks, and should you have downloadable white papers, and, should you be giving webinars? I think about you going to the CSI conference, and even though you have a service, Jeff, that you sell that does operational assessments, you're going to show up and you're going to give the audience something that they can use if they want to do their own operational assessment themselves. And I think to a lot of business owners, that scares the hell out of them, because they're fearful, well, if I tell them how to do it, they're never going to need me. I'm never going to get hired. I'm going to miss out on all this revenue. But the reality was, and what he said, and I suspect maybe I'll get some commentary from you on this, is if you show people how to do something, they're ultimately going to come back when they decide that they want to take it really to the next level and give serious consideration to bringing in an expert. Because even though you can give somebody a blueprint on how to build a house, chances are they're probably still going to hire a builder to build it. Now, does that necessarily mean that maybe they're not going to, clear the lot themselves, or if they've got a bulldozer or a backhoe, maybe they don't dig the hole. But at some point in time, you're probably going to need to have somebody that's going to be able to take it to the next level. And if you've got someone that's helped you along the way, what he proposes is that you'll have much more goodwill in the bank when it comes time for them to pick a vendor than somebody that's guarded everything and held it very close to the chest. So maybe pause on this idea and maybe share your philosophy around showing somebody how to do a self-assessment versus hiring community bank consulting to do it, and how that relates to this value element that he's proposed.
Well, my experience is do-it-yourselfers don't tend to start out with the intent of bringing in an outsider, a third party, a professional. They want to do it themselves. They want to try it themselves. And, I totally agree with his point. Why not help those folks be successful at what it is they're trying to do. And then, if they get deep into it or far enough in that they realize, I don't want to do this myself, or I don't have the skill set to do this myself, or, there are advantages to using an outsider, then yeah, you're top of mind.
Yeah. I try to do that as well. And I don't know about you, then the first couple of times I did it, somebody, hey, we want you to do a breakout session on how to use analytics. I have to admit, I was a little leery, because I'm like, if I show everybody how to do analytics, then why would they want to hire me to go through that? But there are people that are just going to be do-it-yourselfers, and that's fine. But you're going to have a lot greater opportunity if you do it right to expose the knowledge that you have to folks that maybe the light bulb's just going to go off and go, maybe we should do an operational assessment, or maybe I should be paying a little bit more attention to something like Google Analytics or mobile responsive web design, or whatever it is that you're educating on. So I thought that was really cool. So, and then the last item that he shared was just having gratitude. And one of the things that his company does as a way of showing gratitude is they have a practice where they actually write handwritten cards and mail them out. And in today's digital world, an email or even a phone call really doesn't go nearly as far as something that comes from somebody else that's handwritten. And it was actually very, very cool. And it made me think of a story related back to my wife when we first started dating, and we met kind of through the bank, and I got a follow-up card because she was the salesperson and I was the banker. I got a follow-up thank you card, a handwritten thank you card from my wife, and I had not gotten one of those from any other salesperson that I'd worked with in the years that I'd been at the bank. So immediately, Jeff, what I thought is, great. I've got a gal here that's got the hots for me, because that's the only reason that she would ever handwrite a card to somebody. And not until we started dating and we were together one evening, and she kind of pulled out a bunch of thank you cards and started writing thank you cards. And I questioned her and said, what are you doing? And she says, well, I'm writing all my customers thank you cards. I do that for all my customers. And, I was equally shocked, but then amazed and impressed at the same time, because part of me was like, oh, I'm not nearly as important as what I thought I was, because she does this for everybody. But on the other side, it made me really understand, the power of gratitude, and the fact that, that's why she was such a successful salesperson, and taking time to acknowledge and say thank you. And in case you're taking notes, just to recap, it was the power of listening, being responsive, storytelling, authenticity, having better advertising, providing value, and then showing gratitude. So I thought those were 7 really, really good points. So
we lost for a minute, but I think we caught back up. And then Daniel made the comment that he thinks both HubSpot and Constant Contact says that in-house ops more often than not end up abandoned. So just supporting the things that we talked about in terms of being pretty generous with helping folks do things on their own, and it tends to contribute to them coming back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, let's. I see it's 46 minutes past the hour. Let me go through here and just kind of mention. So Michael Furtick was also one of our speakers. Similar in some ways to the concept of being likable, but really focused on the reputation. And his book called The Reputation Economy really went through some of the areas that make a big difference when it comes to what other people are saying about you and how that really matters. I think one of the statistics that I saw was over 90% of people trust the recommendations and reviews of friends and what others others are saying about you. So that kind of plays off of the whole likable area as well. So his was a pretty good session, and all these books are available out to Amazon, and certainly ones that we were fortunate in the sense that we got a couple of books to actually bring back home with us. So that was pretty cool. There was a lot of discussion. Google, for example, I'm just kind of going through my notes here because I took like 11 pages of notes while I was at the event. Google, and I think we talked about this a couple of years ago. I think it was back in 2011. Google came out with what they refer to as the ZMA, or the zero moment of truth, which is when you kind of make the decision to actually make a purchase or enter into a transaction. And that's been around for a while, but the gentleman that was here with Google kind of took that to the next level, and the buzzword that's now permeating the Googleverse is this concept called micro moments, because we're all getting much shorter but much more frequent opportunities to interact with one another and the brands that we are giving consideration to using or purchasing. So you're going to see, I think, a lot more discussion and conversation around the concept of micro moments and how you or your organization can I guess, capitalize on those. They also talked about the immersive and massive power of video and how that's really just kind of taking over video advertising. Video as a way to convey personality and share messaging. They talked about the growing personalization of the internet, and I think what Alec talked about was the internet of me, where people can go online and things are tailored and individualized down to you. So Jeff, your web experience is going to be totally different than my web experience because you have different interests, you have different browsing paths, you have different navigational history, you have different friends on social media that you're liking, and really tailoring that down. And that plays off of I think the episodes that we've done in the past talking about marketing automation and building a process around that so that you can automate as much of it as possible but still provide that personalization. He talked about how consumers are really driving disruption, and he mentioned Uber, for example, and Airbnb and YouTube. And Uber is the largest taxi cab company in the world, but they don't own any vehicles. Airbnb is the largest online reservation platform, but they don't own any hotel properties. And YouTube is the largest television station, but they don't own any video. Consumers have participated in all of these areas, and I frequently will use Uber as an example for the banking industry because there's a lot of information that supports the taxi industry could have reinvented itself but didn't, and then along came Uber and it unseated them, or is in the process of unseating them because it's more convenient and it's less expensive. And we're starting to see in the banking space some new entrants like Simple and some others come in, and the progressive community banks are understanding this and doing things. But when I spend my time down in Florida in a couple of weeks talking to bank CEOs, that's going to be a big topic of discussion, is how can you avoid being the next taxi industry, avoid being the next Blockbuster, avoid being the next Borders Books, when there are companies out there like Netflix and Uber and Amazon that are looking to eat your lunch. He talked about the 4 key moments that are driving search, particularly on a mobile device. The fact is that more people are now using their mobile device to search than they are on a desktop because they're going to their phones and they're asking Siri, or they're going to Google Now, or whatever the case may be. And so he talked about the I want to know moment, where somebody goes online and they want to know something. They're looking for some information. They want to get a statistic. They're at the bar with buddies, and they're, who's the actor that was in this movie? They want to know how to do something, which typically leads to a video. When I swapped the hard drive out on my MacBook Pro, I had another computer right next to me, and I said, how do I change the memory? How do I change my hard drive? And I watched a video that told me how to do that because I wanted to know how to do something. I want to go someplace, so for directions, that's obviously a no-brainer, particularly when it relates to the mobile device. And then the last item was I want to buy something. You see something online, or you hear of something, you want to buy it, you're going to use your mobile device to go online and actually price check, match, compare reviews, see what your friends are using, what their feedback has been. Just like the example, I want to buy a hotel night stay in Las Vegas. My friend has recommended the Rio. How does that really stack up, and did you really enjoy them? So I thought those are pretty cool. Any guess what the fastest growing search term is on Google, Mr. Simpkins?
I don't know.
It's not really a term. It's I guess it's an augment, but the words near me are becoming probably the most, I don't want to say aggressively, but the most frequently used terms in search, because people are out and about and they're looking for a restaurant near me, an ATM machine near me, an automotive store near me. Although they're starting to see that plateau a little bit, because now, and he did mention, the Internet of Me. The fact is, these devices are getting more intelligent, where you don't have to say near me because they now know where you live. It wasn't covered in this conference, but one of the things that I had heard, if you're standing in Paris at the Eiffel Tower and you ask your phone, how tall is it? The phone will know that you're standing at the Eiffel Tower based off of your GPS, and the phone will assume that you're talking about the Eiffel Tower because you're right next to it, and it'll automatically come back with the height of the Eiffel Tower without you ever having to ask, how tall is the Eiffel Tower, or when was it built? So these devices are getting a whole lot more intelligent, which for those that may be a little bit timid about technology, it might freak you out a little bit. Because sometimes you wonder if we're evolving into Skynet and we're going to have the Arnold Schwarzenegger robots coming back to dictate what it is that we do and don't do with our lives. But anyway, it was pretty interesting. So I thought that was pretty cool. So Google shared some really cool stuff. I wish I could have gotten a copy of their slide decks, because, man, they had some really, really cool information. But I took a lot of pictures, and you could see a lot of people holding their phones up and snagging information, which I thought was pretty cool. But yeah, it was something that unfortunately I'm probably not going to get. And then I'm just trying to think some other, one of the things they were talking about, the power of imagery. Facebook was also there, and they were talking about the world as a connected world. And I guess the last story I'll tell is, remember when the satellite was launched, I think it was back in 2006, that headed out to eventually get to Pluto, which we can't really call it a planet anymore. What is it? It's an interstellar body. It's not a planet. It's been downgraded. But regardless of what you call it, the first, or the very first image that NASA shared of Pluto when it came back from that satellite was not in a press release. It wasn't on their website. It was through a post on Instagram. And the cool part about that, which of course Facebook owns, but the cool part about that was the fact that when the satellite or the probe was launched back in 2006, Instagram hadn't even been invented yet. And it became the delivery mechanism of Pluto and making the rest of us aware that it actually existed. And just going off of the whole interconnectivity of how everything is related to one another, it was really pretty cool. So there's a lot of interesting statistics about the connections that exist. And, despite the fact that, only a third of the world's population is not connected yet. So they talked about the Internet of Things, internet.org, with the solar-powered aerial drones that are going to deliver internet to remote areas via laser technology. It was pretty cool. So anyway, just a lot of really interesting stuff, and it's always good to go to those events and get inspired, because you come back all jazzed up and just want to take on the world, which is pretty cool. So well, with that, Mr. Simpkins, I think we've reached the end of our time together. I do know that we are going to have to cancel for next week. I'm actually going to be in Omaha, Nebraska, at the Midwest Independent Bank Shares Users Group meeting, and my session starts right about the time we're supposed to be on free webinar Wednesdays. So we will not have a show next week.
Say hey to Warren Buffett while you're there.
I will. I'm sure I think we're having drinks. I think we're having drinks Tuesday night. So yeah, I'm gonna take him out and buy him a beer and just see what his next hot stock pick is going to be. So
it'd probably be worth you buying the beer for that, but otherwise I would say he could probably foot the bill.
I was going to say he could buy the brewery that we were at if he wanted to, but definitely I would be more than happy to buy him the beer. But what I'm leaning towards doing for that next week, when you're going to be gone to the CSI event, that Wednesday the 30th, we're actually, as part of that bank CEO, they've got a connection with somebody actually from Facebook who is going to be coming in to do a session in between the Monday, Tuesday, and the Thursday, Friday session. And so he's doing a session on social media and Facebook in the morning. And so I'm going to try to see if I can get him convinced to join us and maybe do a two-part session, because he's going to be there for 2 different Wednesdays, and see if we can get a Facebook guest on the show for the 30th and then for the 7th. So keep your fingers crossed. We may be joined by somebody from Facebook royalty, which will be pretty sweet. So wish me luck.
Maybe he can talk about the new unlike button that was written up in the New York Times yesterday.
And I did see that. Whether that ultimately becomes unlike or some other optional way of conveying empathy or sympathy, and since you mentioned it, that I think the reason behind that is, if God forbid somebody that has a loss, a parent dies or a grandparent is someplace hospitalized or whatever, and they post a picture, it seems a little uncomfortable to click the like button. Your mom just died. Hey, I like that, because you don't necessarily want to like the fact that your mom just died. But you want to make sure that you can, convey your empathy as to what it is that is going on with your friend through social media. So I don't know if they formally decided. I haven't checked yet this morning if it's going to be an unlike button or if that's just what the media jumped on and thought it was going to be unlike. But it'll be curious to see what happens with that. So maybe he can share some insight on that with us as well. So cool. Good. Well, best of luck to you at your conference, Jeffrey. And, I'm sure you'll do great, and tell all my friends there at CSI I said hello. And, again, if you're going to be at that event, be sure to look Jeff up, attend his session, and learn all about the cool stuff that he's doing for operational assessments and make your bank a whole lot more efficient. So that'd be great. Cool. With that, I think we're done. Let's go ahead and we'll see everybody in a couple weeks. Enjoy the rest of your week and next week as well. And we'll look forward to seeing you here online, at least at freewebinarwednesdays.com. Until then, have a good one. See you, everybody.